Hey, TV production guy here. I want to take a little time today and talk about video editing software. A lot of people I train always ask me, what video editing programs do I have and what video editing programs do I recommend? Now, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, do you have a PC or a Mac? Because whichever one you have, you probably already have a free editing software right on your computer. If you have a PC, you already have Windows Movie Maker. And if you have a Mac, you may already have iMovie. If you don't, you can go on to the App Store and you can buy iMovie for only $14.99. Now, both these two programs, Windows Movie Maker and iMovie, I recommend for any beginner user to go out and start using. Go out, shoot some video, bring it back, and start editing it today. That way you can get your hands on an editing machine, editing software, and you can kind of practice and see if you're into it, if you like it. The next step will be then to move on to something bigger once you've mastered those beginner programs. And the three I'm going to talk about today are the Final Cut series, Adobe Premiere Pro, and Avid. Now, there's a bunch of programs in between, like Pinnacle and Sony Vegas Pro, but I don't recommend those, so I'm not going to talk about them. If you've done the beginner ones, it's time for you to move on, I think, to the bigger ones, not the medium-sized ones. The Final Cut series we're going to start off with. Final Cut Pro, which is included in Final Cut Studio, has kind of been discontinued, but it's still out there and you can buy it, and I still think it's a good intermediate level software that will help an editor grow. Now, you'll want to look for Final Cut Studio 3. They still sell these on eBay. They're probably about $800. You might be able to find it for a little bit less. And Final Cut Studio 3 will contain Final Cut Pro 7 that you can edit on. It'll contain motion, live type, color, and it's a very good all-complete around creative suite. Now, the one problem with Final Cut is it's eventually going to become extinct because the Final Cut Pro series did end. Apple's not selling it anymore. So once formats keep on changing and other things change, Final Cut is eventually going to die out. The Final Cut Pro, that is. Apple did release Final Cut X a couple months ago. Now that one you can find in the App Store for $299.99. I'd recommend Final Cut X for someone who is just past the beginner level and looking to move on to the intermediate level. For a cheap price, you can get a little bit better program. It's going to be a lot like iMovie, and you can do some cool stuff with it. It has some nice effects. I hear it's very good with color. But an important thing to remember is with the Final Cut Pro and the Final Cut X, that's only for Mac users. That's only going to be able to be on Mac. You can't load that onto a PC. So think about that. Now let's move on to Adobe Premiere Pro. Adobe Premiere Pro it's been around for a while, and when I first started using it about 10 years ago, I didn't like it at all. I wouldn't have recommended it. Now, as time has gone on, they're starting to finally, I think, get what their editing system needs to have on it. And it's, in the last year or so, it's really taken leaps and bounds. I saw the Adobe tent at NAB last year in Las Vegas, and I was very impressed with everything they talked about with Adobe Premiere Pro. That's going to cost you about $800, and you can get that right off of the Adobe website. But if you're really thinking about it, you got to think before you buy this how far you want to go. Because if you really want to do a lot of other things, and you want to do things in Photoshop and After Effects, you can actually buy the Adobe Creative Suite Production Premium, and you'll get Adobe Premiere Pro, After Effects, Illustrator, Photoshop, and a couple other programs, and that's going to cost you about $1,600. So you need to decide where you want to go before you kind of make these purchases. But I would recommend Adobe Premiere Pro. Now let's talk about Avid. Avid is really the big boy of this group. It has a ton of great features, tons of effects, can track motion. It's really the leader in video editing softwares, and you're going to pay for that quality though. That's going to cost you around $2,200 to $2,500 for their latest version, which is Avid Media Composer 5.5. Now that one I would really recommend. What I'm going to stress to anybody out there who's moved past those basic programs is if you're not looking to spend a lot of money, then go to Final Cut X, and if you have a Mac, and you want to get that on for about $299.99 on the App Store. Now once if you don't want to go to that, you want to come to a next step, maybe you want to go for the Final Cut Pro series, buying a Final Cut Studio 3. Like I said, you can get that on eBay. It's going to cost you around $800, maybe a little bit less. If you don't want to go Final Cut Pro, you want to look at something else, maybe you want to go to Adobe Premiere Pro. Now, I didn't mention it, but that's on PC and Mac. That'll go either way. Now, I would recommend that one. And if you want to spend the extra money because you want a couple other tools like After Effects and Photoshop, then go for the Production Premium, the whole bundle of the Creative Suite, and get a couple more programs. That's going to cost you $1,600. Now, if money is not an option for you, my strongest recommendation is to go to Avid Media Composer 5.5. But the restriction there is going to be that it costs a lot of money, but that can also be used on PC or Mac. Now, another thing I'll stress just to end these thoughts of what programs to use and what programs each level should go for is always look on, if you want to try to save a little bit of money, look on second seller sites, look on eBay, and see if you can find somebody who's selling a used copy or something like that. What you could also do is if you're a student, look for student discounts or look for student editions. A lot of these programs will sell student editions at a lot lower rate. That's basically what you want to look for in an editing program. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and I'll talk to you later.